Central
wherever it
West
was,
End.
basically at the end of the night, then people will disperse, but sometimes some people will stay, and it's hard to control a smaller subset of the people. And actually, even the mayor gives good credit on that, and she said the vast majority of protesters are nonviolent and blame the trouble on a group of agitators. Good, because they even went to her house. So, but she understands it's not everybody. But the police don't understand, and that's why these are chemical weapons and stuff. So, I mean, the next thing to talk about is the notion of being nonviolent versus the notion of being peaceful. Protest leaders are pretty clear that. No, please, yeah, question.
Because what I had heard for the Central West End protest is that because it was so well organized, that the organizers sort of announced a time at which like the protest was officially over.
Yeah.
Is that, can you kind of, and which I thought was kind of a good strategy to sort of say, you know, then if there were like some stragglers who like do wild things, it's not
so
like that.
No, that's right.
Is that accurate?
So, yeah, super well organized. Right. So the next thing is nonviolent but not peaceful. I mean, that's something that's been pretty clear from the leaders from the get-go. It's going to be a nonviolent movement. That doesn't mean it's going to be a peaceful movement. It's good to disrupt. It's good to make people uncomfortable. You know, if you're sitting in your car because an intersection is blocked, you don't understand the pain of a family who lost, you know, their loved ones, right? It's not the same. So there's a level of civil disobedience, and that's what that is. So, I mean, that's just something to think about. The next thing is demands, right? Like, I think people are going to be in the streets for a long time, and people have been in the streets for a long time, and, you know, I think, and not everyone does, that they probably should be, but at the end of the day, hopefully we'll have some sort of change that comes out of it, and that comes from demands. So I pulled this article, and basically the mayor was going to hold a town hall, and she ended up canceling the town hall. So the organizers said, you know, we don't really need you for a town hall. They probably learned that from Al. They held their own. It was called the People's Town Hall. It was super well attended. Community leaders were there, you know, speaking when the mayor would not speak. And what came out of it were some demands. And you can click on the link if you want to read all the demands, and you definitely should. Look at this article especially. But I pulled a couple that I think are pretty meaningful. An audit of the St. Louis Metro Police Department, the removal of acting police chief Lawrence O'Toole, stricter use of force policies for the police, public engagement in the search of a new chief, which I think has been happening.
Can you slow down a little?
Yeah, sorry. I'll email this out to you.
Okay.
But I will also slow down.
Email it to Al, and Al can disperse.
Yeah, that'd be easy. The abolition of cash-only bail, which would be great because, you know, we shouldn't really be jailing people because they don't have the money to pay for fines that they probably shouldn't be getting anyway.
That's getting attention somewhere else. I mean, like
yeah,
on a
Maplewood,
national
right?
level. Yeah,
And
well,
other
you think
places,
even
too.
I feel like there's something on NPR this past
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
I heard that
forget
too.
the details.
Yeah, and Vice does a good thing on debtors' prison. I mean, it's a national. I mean, we see it in St. Louis because we live here, but these aren't things that only
It costs
exist here.
more to keep people incarcerated than the small fine that they can't pay
For
at
sure.
that time.
For
It's
sure.
not fiscally effective. It's not cost effective.
Well,
It doesn't.
depends on, are you a for-profit prison or?
Well, yeah, exactly. But it's the taxpayers paying for it, right? So.
Right,
They
but
don't care.
Well, it's the punitive nature of it. That's what they want.
Yeah.
They're punishing you
And
Being poor.
for being, yeah.
what it ends up is there really is only one demand, which is, you know, to stop killing us, to stop killing people of color, to have some accountability for police, and that's the demand that will really, you know, make a change. So there's also something that people should look into, which is the Ferguson Commission, which came out of, you know, Ferguson, as the name suggests. So they have all these call to actions, pretty easy to read, super informative, and the best part, in my opinion at least, is the call to action. They specify an actor, right? So like, this is what the faith community should do. This is what the Board of Aldermen should do. This one would probably need to be done by a state level. This is for the nonprofits, right? And then it's really divided, so it's not like, these are some great things we could do. It's like, this is concrete ways to take action, and these are like the agents that have the power to take those actions. And one of them is a 25-year racial equity fund. So there's massive amounts of racial inequality and systemic racism, and if we don't have like a way to try to make up for that in a you know, organized manner, then we probably aren't. And that was a call to action, you know, years ago, right? And there is no racial equity fund. It doesn't exist. Next is, I mean, I kind of think protesters get a bad rap, and people think they don't have jobs, and they're disorganized, and they're, you know,
so funny.
loud, and, you know, they're not really doing much, but it's not true in this case. So,
they're paid, right?
yeah, oh, right. And I'm rolling in Soros money. If you have any questions, you check out my car. And you'll be able to tell.
I'm still waiting for my check.
Yeah, it's the checks. Checks gotta come in.
It's in the mail.
But these protests are different because actually they took a day and they went around and they registered voters and they talked about services, and that's, I mean, that means a lot, right? That makes a world of difference to talk to people about these are services available in your community, this is how you vote, this is where you vote, this is when you vote, and I mean, that's important to do. So there's a really good public radio article about that. They also had a big mass meeting that I attended. It was full of people, and it was super democratic, and it was super open, and they talked about, you know, taking ideas from everyone, and how can we sustain the protests, and what sort of stuff do you want to see, and what type of action should we be taking, you know, how do we do this through the winter when it gets cold, you know, all kind of stuff like that. So, no secrets. And then results. I mean, the stuff Lyda said about Civilian Oversight Board, that's a big one. The appointment of a public safety director was good. That happened 2 days after that Young Dems forum I was telling you guys about, where Bruce Franks, who was another one of the panelists, actually said, you know, before we need a new police chief, we need a public safety director. It's the most important thing we need. And, you know, I don't think that materialized in 2 days. It was probably in the works, but if that didn't speed it up, I'd be surprised. Then there's a link to a BBC video, so even more like mainstream news coverage. And it's it's just like a 3-minute video, and it has clips from all different days of the protest. You can click on that link if you're interested. So now I'll talk a little bit about the highway part of it itself. So there's a meetup at Schnucks in the parking lot, and we divided it into 2 groups into 2 different parking lots. Oh, and I'm a lawyer, and he said this is like kind of circumstantially sort of stuff, so maybe it was me, maybe it wasn't. So you know, take that however you want. So some people, and maybe me and maybe not, met up at Schnucks parking lot, and 2 groups, right? So the groups were drivers and non-drivers, and the instructions were the same. So they said, you know, Schnucks is already locked up, they think we're going there. The Fox is getting ready to shut down, they think we're going there. We're not going to either of those places. So you can see the power of even just like the possibility of a protest, right? That took 0 people to shut those places down. But yeah, I mean, turns out that we were going to the highway, so that's what we did. The next link is to a picture. You've probably seen it. So, you know, the lights, the cars, and the people, and you know, it's a picture. So the process of that was the cars drove the people, right? So 3 or 4 people per car, way less cars than people. Then they would block the lanes on the highway, right? Because you saw what happened in Charlottesville, right? And the car drove. And this way there would be cars, rows of cars protecting the people. And then also one would be in the shoulder, so you couldn't come up like that. So I got in an argument with a guy on Facebook, which I try to never do, like as a rule. And he was basically saying, you know, how could you block a highway? That's how people die. The ambulance can't get there in time. And so there's actually a protocol for that. I remember one of the protest nights was on the Kings Highway, and an ambulance kind of flipped on its lights and sirens, and everybody moved, and the ambulance went. As soon as it got through the post, you know, turned them off. It's a fake. So there is a plan for that. We're not trying to kill any people in ambulances, so that's important. Yeah, so no, it totally worked really well. The highway got shut down for like 30 minutes. People all got in front. We marched. You know, we may or may not have marched. And then on the top of the bridges, you know, it was like cops, and then there was a bridge, and it had a bus, and there were people coming out of the bus, and they were all cheering and yelling, and that was really powerful to see them, you know, stop what they were doing and kind of engage with the protesters. And then cops started coming down the other side of the highway, right, like driving the wrong way, because they shut down the whole. So we were on one half, but the whole highway got shut down. So the folks took the exits, the Jefferson exit, and now I'll just read you a news clip from the article in my presentation, which says, a large group of protesters blocked I-6440 tonight for more than 30 minutes before exiting the highway and marching north down Jefferson Avenue. The protesters were met with a line of riot cops at Jefferson and Market on the western edge of downtown St. Louis, streets blocked on both ends. Live streams showed protesters, including State Rep Bruce Franks, Democrat St. Louis, repeatedly asking nearby officers for direction. Officers ordered the crowd to move back, but there was nowhere to go. Move where, Frank shouted. So that's pretty good on what happened, but I mean, like, think about a group of people, and we'll just say they're marching this way, right? And then, you know, row of riot cops here, right? Row of riot cops here, right? So all of a sudden there's nowhere for you to go but back. And then there's a row there. So remember that it was a kettling, that's right. Yeah, the kettling I was talking about earlier is what happened. So they said, get on the sidewalk. So we got on the sidewalk. You know, Bruce and the other leaders were saying, you know, can we go home? Can we go back to our cars? You know, police are supposed to give what's called a dispersal order. So they say, this is an unlawful assembly. Anyone that stays here will be subject to arrest. And then you leave. No one gets arrested. You know, you do it again tomorrow. So that's not what happened. There was no dispersal order. They kept saying stuff like, we'll mace you. So we got back on the sidewalk. And then there's a little parking lot in the back, and some people started to kind of move that way, maybe get out the back. And then some people did, actually, but I didn't. So bike cops swarmed all up in there and blocked everyone. And, they said, we'll mace you. So, sometimes they want to let you go, and sometimes they want to not let you go. And this time they didn't. And that's kind of what happens when you're, the officer of the state. So there was nowhere to go. People started, they said, sit down, get down on the ground. People started sitting down on the ground. They linked up in arms and were chanting. And, there's really nowhere to go. And then the police would say, you're all under arrest. So there are problems with that, right? Like, people joined this crowd that weren't actually on the highway. But there were like 140-ish people on the highway, I think, but 160-something people got arrested. Or if those aren't the right numbers, the numbers are different. So yeah, that happened. Police take, masks away. They take away the like the Windex, the spray bottles, which are filled with apple cider vinegar and labeled. And I saw a funny quote, and police said, we're afraid of those chemicals. And I was like, yeah, you're afraid of chemicals? A large group of people and chemicals are scary? That, who knew? So.
And the people all covered in riot gear.
Yeah, but the worst part of the whole thing, even worse than the jail and anything, is when the police were coming in to arrest people, they took their shields and they were beating on people's arms, like whose arms were linked, to get them to pull apart. And it was just like, it was a violence that was only on one side and totally unnecessary. And that's kind of just a snapshot of the problems we deal with when we deal with police. Because there's no recourse. I haven't heard of anyone saying, the police were disciplined for that or anything.
The ACLU's filed.
Yeah, there's 4 lawsuits, I think, since the protest has started. But, too bad everyone had to get beat for that. And then the next thing is jail. So, yeah, they tell you they're going to arrest you, and then they pretty much do. So we all got zip-tied. They put us in the back of the paddy wagon, and they drove us to the Justice Center, which is downtown. And, I don't know, jail's pretty, underwhelming. It was boring, mostly. We were only in there with each other. We got booked and processed, so they cut off the zip ties, which was nice. And they take all your stuff, they put it in a bag, you have to sign it, and they take your picture, and whatever, and you have to take the shoelaces out of your shoes, and I'm wearing different shoes, but the laces are still not right. They don't put it back for you. It's kind of on you at the end. So. I ended up in a cell with Reverend Gray. If you don't know Reverend Gray, you should meet him. And he actually was marched and was involved with Martin Luther King. And so to hear him talk about the similarities and the differences, the young leaders that have emerged this time, and kind of the energy, was really nice. But you're kind of in a big room with 2 really long benches, so there's no beds or anything like cells. We didn't make it that far. So if you want to sleep, people are using their shoes as pillows and sleeping under the benches. There's a toilet in the back, but no running water, just in the back of the cell. So we were there. Then everyone has to see the nurse. So there's one nurse. She kind of has to check off a few things, and then you get sent upstairs. And so it seemed like after every person, she would take a little break, which is good because late at night. But then they brought in some more nurses, and they checked everyone in. And I was actually out by 9 a.m. the next morning. I know some people were held until 6 p.m. the next night. A lot, actually. This is a lawyer who I don't know what he did, but yeah. He was, right, you were or you weren't, right? Is that what it is? Allegedly you were the lawyer?
I was there, don't worry. Yeah.
So he was
How
there.
many hours
There's a judge who heard a lot from me. So that was out there, that was 31 hours.
Yeah.
So in my notes, I just wrote super lawyer. So that's him. Yeah, some people were denied their medication. They ended up going tons of hours without their medicine, and I heard police say stuff like, well, maybe you shouldn't be protesting then, which is, ridiculous, right? Because everyone should have the freedom to express themselves how they want, and, nobody should be denied their medicine. So if you're worried about me, if you're my dad maybe, my status is kind of up in the air, because I was let go without a court date or anything like that, so, we'll see. I heard a rumor that they're getting ready to charge everybody, so it's supposed to be misdemeanor trespassing, we'll see. That's why I might have been there. So then...
Wait, they're arresting you for trespassing on the sidewalk?
On the public
On the highway. The highway.
So yeah, who knows? So then the last thing is why protest? That's a question I get the most. I think there are tons of reasons to protest. The injustice in the Stockley verdict, the injustice generally, the lack of accountability for police officers, corrupt status quo politicians, corporate first, policies, no accountability. Racism. And so I think there are tons of reasons to be angry, and reasons that I don't even understand, but other people do. And then I think it works. I talked a lot about the results I think we've seen come out of the protest. I think more is to come. I wrote down a couple quotes. The Martin Luther King one is pretty famous, right? Violence is the language of the unheard. I think that hits home for this. Actually, that's the one. I'm going to roll with that one. So with that, I'll take some questions if you want, and if I have time.
I do have a question.
For sure.
What's the best way to find out about what's going on? Because it's been spotty
That's a great question.
for me.
One place.
I do it on Facebook from Expect Us.
Yeah.
If you look at Expect Us,
And Weekend sending out the.
Weekend sends out. There's certain people that text it out. If you get on Signal, Signal is like encrypted text messaging, safer that way. A lot of times you'll find that at the protest you go to one place and they'll tell you to go somewhere else, and that's on purpose. And then I've said this on Facebook, but just in case we're not friends on Facebook, if you're not at the protest because you don't have anyone to go with and you're nervous about it, I'll go with you and we can stay back and make sure we don't get arrested. That's totally fine. As best as I can. But really, to have as many people out there as possible is the goal.
Why is it important to have white people out there?
What's the quote that you gave the other night?
Well, that's one reason, which I will give again. But the main reason, I think, is the police act differently the more white people there are.
Mm-hmm.
And especially older white people, especially people with their kids, I think they act differently. And if you're just going to let the African Americans hanging out there by themselves, police are going to treat them completely differently. So that's why a lot of us have to be out there.
And it was really interesting to go to St. Charles, the protest in St. Charles, and it was Oktoberfest, and we kind of went there. And to hear the people, kind of like pretty drunk, screaming like terrible things at fellow humans.
I know, it's just even looking at the stuff on Facebook.
The most interesting was that the police arrested 3 people and it was all counter protesters who were drunk and disorderly or violent or whatever. So at least that night they did pretty well. I thought.
You mentioned bias in jury selection and jury pools.
Yeah.
Are African Americans, Latinos, and other minorities, are they underrepresented in jury pools?
That's a good question for the lawyer. I guess it's yes.
It depends where you are, right? And
so like Clayton.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know the statistics exactly, but having selected juries before and seeing other people do it too, they say it's a jury of your peers, right? But within our system, there are strikes that you get to use in order to get people off of your jury. And we have like laws against, and there are court decisions against selecting a jury based on for discriminatory purposes, right? But people find ways around that. So one I saw, for example, which was a reverse discrimination case against the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. The plaintiff, so the person who was suing, the white guy who was suing, they eliminated 3 of the 4 black jurors. And when there was a challenge put up against that saying, well, that's discriminatory, you can't do that, there's no other reason, the response was, well, we thought all the jurors were great, so we just decided to pick the last 3 numerically, and they all happened to be black. So that withstood one of those challenges. So there's a lot of systemic stuff that still goes on within juries and jury selection that, one way or another you can use to skew a bit. You're not supposed to, but you can.
And if we can keep people of color off the border.
Yes. So folks who have felonies, for example, they're not serving on a jury. And that is, within our system, that, there are folks who are having felonies in the records more than others, and that's primarily young black men.
When I was stumping for Tashara Jones,
yeah.
I ran into many members of the city who said, "I'm sorry, I can't."
Right. Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah. And there's some education piece around that too, because some folks, after they get a felony, and I've seen this on, like, for example, just that voter registration action that we did, but there are some folks who, they have a felony, they're off probation, and they don't know that they can vote now. They think that they can't vote ever again. Yeah. No one informs them, like, hey, you're good now. Yeah. So we should do that. Now, there are folks who are still like, if they are under state supervision, then they can't. But the moment that they're off, they're able to do that again.
Are we taking questions now?
Yeah, sorry.
I have a daughter in LA. She's become more activated in many different ways, but she's gone to training for nonviolent protests or whatnot. Did you have any training or introduction or what to do, what not to do?
There are trainings for sure. I saw a risk management workshop that I think ARC hosts. That is a training. Did I do that? No. I mean, I go with like people that I know and people who've done it before. I mean, yeah, no.
You're kind of going in with a certain knowledge piece that you're comfortable with.
It's a learning by doing, but before that, I started like knocking on doors for the union. So it's not a protest, but you're outside engaging with people in their homes, and it's similar.
I hate canvassing.
I know.
I love canvassing. I hate canvassing.
That's good. Great. Well, any other questions for Jack? I think it's wonderful that you come and talk to us.
Yeah,
Jack.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'll send you the presentation, and you can send it out. It's
Great,
full of
yeah.
those links. Like
Yeah, I
was
wanted
saying.
to.
We'll get it out.
Yeah,
Get
no,
out to
it's
everybody who signed in.
for everyone.
Which is
Excellent.
more motivation to sign in.
Just like a Google Docs. You can even edit it, I guess.
Where's the sign?
Good.
So,
Is it okay if we distribute it
just as a-
out into the world?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
just
Because
as
it
a
sounds like you've done a
clarification.
lot of, the research and
And
the
do you have
links.
your
and-
name on it and contact?
No,
do you,
but I
do you
can-
want that? Just like if people have questions or want to follow up? It
Yeah,
might be good to have
definitely.
your
No,
email or
I'll
something.
add it, or you can get it from Al, or actually, I mean,
Put
I
your
know you
name
from
on
West
your
County
paper.
Dems, but
Yeah, Vernon?
So this is just, you said there at the end, expect us on Facebook?
yeah, it's called Expect Us.
So that's a place where people want to get involved in the protest movement, it would be a starting point?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
That's where they put the announcement for the next action, or the next 3 or 4 actions
Okay.
will be there. So that's the place to look for the definitive one. And I wouldn't bother trying to send them a message. You can, but they'll respond. But just show up where it says.
Yeah.
And probably one of us will be there. So if you need a ride down, call one of us.
Well, I retired a while ago, but just as an aside, I drive for Amazon, so I know the city really well. I'm learning a lot of interesting stuff. I feel safer in the city than out in the excerpt, where I still see Confederate symbols everywhere, and guns.
Those areas are more dangerous.
And I also drive for Uber and Lyft, so.
Yeah, when I canvassed for the union ahead of the general election in 2016, we only had problems. African American canvassers had problems in places like St. Anne, and I never had problems in the city, no matter where I was. So
Yeah.
just something to think about.
It is very interesting.
It's dogs, but it's people.
And it's an amazing city. I am an import. You